Republicans really dug their heels in, and even 30K they rejected, and were able to get it boosted up to 40K. So it's going to be a tough battle for Johnson, the SALT Republicans, and then you have Thune and the leadership on the Senate side.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by economics reporter Zach Halaschak. Zach, the SALT diet.
Yes.
The salt
high sodium
reduction,
diet.
High sodium diet. So that's become a real point of contention in the big, beautiful bill. Was really important to how it got over the finish line in the House. But it's not really a concern among Senate Republicans.
No. I mean, if you remember the House negotiations, when the House was passing the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or known as reconciliation, that was a huge sticking point. And finally, Mike Johnson was able to corral these Republicans in high tax states like Mike Lawler and LaLota and others into a room and get to this agreement, which was lifting the $10,000 SALT cap, or cap on state and local tax deductions, and raising it up to $40,000 with a $500,000 a year income threshold. So that was kind of the agreed to thing in the House. And so this whole legislative vehicle now has to go over the Senate, and the Senate can change around what it wants, and then it sends it back to the House for final approval. Now the Senate is a little different. In the House, there are Republicans in states that are blue states, like high tax blue states. Those are the type of Republicans who are going to want to increase the SALT cap because it benefits their constituents. In the Senate, you don't have any senators from New York or senators from California. You just, maybe Susan Collins, but it's not as big of an issue in Maine. But
a lot of those, and a lot of the people who are affected by it are sort of coastal Democrats, are probably not going to vote for Susan Collins.
No, exactly. And, so there's no real advocates for raising the SALT cap on the Senate side. And in fact, a lot of people would love to see it, go back down to 10,000 or not be increased by as much as 40K. So what you're seeing now is the Senate kind of pushing on that envelope that, maybe we'll, kind of adjust it on our end and bring it down to 30 or 20 or, wherever it could be lower than that 40K limit. And you're seeing the pushback on the House side now again, like we saw when it was just on the House side. I was talking to LaLota and Malliotakis yesterday, and both of them were like, this is a done deal. We thought this was settled and we weren't going to have to relitigate this again. I think LaLota told me, he was like, it's like the Senate came in and is digging up radioactive waste from a mile underground, and it's going to pollute the entire bill because we're not going to go along with whatever the Senate comes. So you have this clash between chambers that's kind of interesting, and it's yet to be seen how it'll play out. I would be surprised if it moves down much further than 40,000, just because they are very dug in. If you remember, during the House side negotiations, Republicans really dug their heels in. The SALT Republicans really dug their heels in, and even 30K they rejected, and were able to get it boosted up to 40K. So it's going to be a tough battle for Johnson, the SALT Republicans, and then you have Thune and the leadership on the Senate side.
Salt those old wounds. So the congressional lots of salt wounds. So the Congressional Budget Office has come out with some new forecasts, looking at the Trump tariff revenue, looking at the big beautiful bill. What are some of the numbers that they've come out with?
So they did the One Big Beautiful Bill, OB3. They came out with the numbers for how much it would add to the deficit. And this is obviously controversial because Republicans will say that it'll pay for itself by increasing growth. And this didn't account for growth, so it didn't have dynamic scoring. It didn't account for that. Without the dynamic scoring, they said it would add to the deficit by $2.4 trillion over 10 years. So that's a pretty sizable chunk of money. And Democrats are obviously going to use that to attack Republicans as being fiscally irresponsible. You see Elon Musk right now, who's attacking this bill for not having enough spending cuts and for adding to the deficit and the debt situation, that sort of thing. And then on the same day, actually, kind of ironic, they also came out with a report on how much tariffs, Trump's tariff agenda would bring into the country.
The big, beautiful tariffs.
The big, beautiful tariffs. And it was kind of pretty large as well. It was actually $2.8 trillion. Now, a lot of people would say, well, then that tariff revenue pays for these tax cuts. It's a little more complicated than that because, again, first of all, a lot of these tariffs have been scaled back in the courts, or still, being litigated in the court system. Trump has also changed on some of his tariff policies, so a lot of these that might be in place now, they could reach a trade deal, and then that change the revenue projection. And then the biggest thing is just that Trump's only going to be in office for 3.5 more years, and after him, the next president could end all those tariffs. So saying there's definite $2.8 billion in revenue capture, or trillion in revenue capture, is not really a feasible argument, but it is an interesting fact because Trump has been saying this would bring in a lot of revenue. So, that's a little bit of a feather in Republicans who support tariffs hat.
So you've talked to Senator Josh Hawley, Republican senator from Missouri, and he has some plans for the child tax credit. What are they? Another
part of the one big, beautiful bill is the increasing the child tax credit. So right now the child tax credit, which was last increased in 2017, is at $2,000. The House version of the bill brings it up to $2,500 for a few years, and then after that indexes it to inflation. So that's basically just an inflation adjustment from 2017. So it's not really a huge increase like some, pro-family, pro-natalism advocates were kind of hoping for. Hawley is big on these tax cuts for especially the working class, for families. So I was talking to him on the Hill, and he said he's gonna, in reconciliation, push to increase that $2,500 amount. Beyond that, I asked him how much. He said ideally $5,000, so essentially doubling what the House sent over to the Senate side. I think that's a pretty big ask. I would be surprised if it ends up anywhere near $5,000 per child. But I think that it shows that he's kind of like the SALT lawmakers, coming in from a high starting point and hoping to get somewhere in between those two numbers.
Sure.
Again, it's sort of, I don't know how many lawmakers in the Senate, Republicans in the Senate, are really huge on getting a big child tax credit. Some of the biggest child tax credit senators in the Republican Party have already left, like Rubio, if you remember, he's now Secretary of State.
J.D.
Vance is now Vice President. So two of those biggest advocates are gone, and a lot of the Republicans still in the Senate are kind of more on the, they agree with the child tax credit, but they don't want to see these big populist boosts to the credit like you'd see among some like Vance and Rubio and others. So it'll be interesting to see where that lands on. I know there's also some proponents on the House side I've talked to, a bigger child tax credit. Blake Moore from Utah has talked to me about wanting it to be bigger than, the kind of the level that it was set at now. But we'll see where it shakes out. And just like SALT, we're going to see where that shakes out as well.
Shaking the salt all over the place.
Shaking it all up.
Lift those caps.
Exactly.
Thank you, Zach.
Yep.
You can read Zach and the rest of our policy team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.